Just in case anybody cared, I'm going to share with you guys a little bit of information today that I've picked up over the last few days. So, talking about engine technologies, right? We got a lot of things moving around in engines today, a lot of new technologies emerging fast, maybe from the last few years, but they're becoming major in today's society. Get ready for a little bit of a podcast because I'm about to throw a lot of information at you. So, gasoline direct injection, I talk about this all the time. I don't love it, but it's a great thing. Gets a lot more gas mileage and power out of normal small-sized engines, right? That's why we're moving away from V8 engines. They're inefficient, let's face it. Fortunately, can't really get much more than 16 miles a gallon out of them before we start throwing in fancy cylinder deactivation technology and shit, which, as you know, is very unreliable. So, gasoline direct injection has made its presence in our vehicles today. Now, with gasoline direct injection, your car has two fuel pumps. It has a fuel pump in the back and it has a fuel pump in the front. There is a low pressure fuel pump that includes the fuel filter. They're usually built into the gas tanks now. And then that gets pumped down a line to the front in the engine bay. And in the engine bay, either electronically or it might be belt controlled. It's very rare to see them belt controlled these days though. You will have a high pressure fuel pump. The high pressure fuel pumps will generally be belt driven on diesels, but not on gasoline engines. If you have a gasoline direct injection car, chances are you have a 4-cylinder engine. 4-cylinder engines are very notorious to have these days because these are the engines we're trying to crank the power out of because we are trying to get insane gas mileage out of them. I mean, how do you think we get 30 to 50 miles a gallon out of 4-cylinder engines without just using hybrid technology? It just would not be possible without gasoline direct injection. When you couple that with turbocharging, you are creating a perfect recipe for power out of something small. Unfortunately, it wears them out faster, and that's a topic for another day, but regardless, that's how you're getting the power, right? So these high pressure fuel pumps, they make a lot of noise. They click a lot. If you notice on modern cars, especially Hondas, you'll pay attention to them. When they idle, you hear a weird ticking sound. It almost sounds like, I don't know how to describe it. 4-cylinder engines always tick, but the modern 4-cylinder engines have a different tick and a different hum to them than the old ones did. They almost sound a little bit like weed whackers a little bit. I don't know how to describe it quite. It's a very low frequency hum / tick. Again, some of that's due to the harmonics of 4-cylinder engines and them revving a little bit higher, but it's mostly because of these high pressure fuel pumps. They click a lot, especially when they are electronically controlled. There are shrouds that go on top of them that dampen the sound. I am not making this up, guys. It is hilarious. I just watched a video on a Mitsubishi yesterday and they have a dedicated shroud for it because they know it is so loud at idle. So I just found that interesting, one to share that with you guys because I had noticed that 4-cylinder engines, modern ones, like I said, have a different tick than they used to. They used to be a lot quieter. Now they have a lot weirder of a sound, and quite frankly, I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not a big fan of very intense low frequency sound, which is generally what they output. But regardless, I just wanted to let you guys know that because I didn't know that, and now I know. I knew they had high pressure fuel pumps. I did not realize they clicked like that. Another thing. So I have complained in the past to my friends. My dad's Jeep that I am sitting in presently has an 8-speed automatic transmission made by ZF. Fantastic transmission, one of the most reliable in the world currently, and one of the best feeling in the world currently because it's 8 speeds, those low gear ratios, tap, 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 getting through the gears fast at lower RPMs. However, so my dad's Jeep, I'm not a big fan of how it works in automatic mode because in my truck, in traditional old 4 and 5 speeds, you were used to going 0 to 30 miles an hour. Usually at 30 miles an hour, you got through all 4 gears, bang, 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 bang. Usually at like the major shift points, 10 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour, and then overdrive. That's how it used to be. Fortunately, in the Jeep Wrangler, at least in this case, and I know particularly on other trucks too, I know this for Chrysler for a fact. I could not tell you about every manufacturer ever, but Chrysler is one of the only ones in America that really uses the ZF right now currently. It does not like to ride in higher gears at lower speeds. Like you will never get into overdrive at 30 miles an hour. The computer simply will not let you. I mean, the gear ratio would be insanely high. I mean, you'd be talking about running at like probably 800 RPM. So, I mean, it would be kind of impossible. But I just wanted to say though, at like 30 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour, the Jeep Wrangler runs at like 1500 RPM, which is a little bit high, especially considering this is a V6 engine. V6 engines rev higher than V8 engines, but my V8 engine runs at a lot lower RPM than that. My V8 engine runs at like 1500. not 1500, but like 1100 RPM at 30 miles an hour when overdrive kicks in, fourth gear for me. And I mean, if you guys drive a higher speed transmission, you'll know the feel I'm talking about. It feels laggy. It feels like there's play in the drive line because you still have so much torque that the engine can utilize when you're only in sixth gear out of eighth gear. And it just doesn't feel right when that's your cruising speed, because then when you go to step on the gas, you feel the whole car like lurch, versus if you were in overdrive and it would be a 1-to-1 ratio, and well, more than 1-to-1, but regardless, the engine would be spinning the same speed as the transmission internally, and you wouldn't feel that lurch. So why does the Jeep only run in sixth gear at 30 miles an hour, while my truck that has the same overdrive gear ratio run at 1100 RPM at that speed? It's not just because the Jeep Wrangler runs at a higher RPM because it has a V6 engine. It is because of how the computers manage the idling system of the car. The car does not like to run at lower RPMs. And this isn't just because it's inherently a V6 engine. This is all cars in general, particularly by Chrysler right now. Because Chrysler's design of engines, the way they design their overhead cams, they get a lot more power out of the engine. I mean, this is a V6 engine that puts out 285 horsepower and 285 pound-feet of torque, which is quite a lot to be pulling out of a 3.6 liter that only has gasoline direct injection added to it. However, actually, I think it has gasoline direct injection. I'm not entirely sure on that. I just wouldn't be surprised if it did, because that's a lot of power they're pumping out of that. However, dual overhead cams adds a lot of power to your engine. You are talking about increased ratios for how you're going to have intake and exhaust come out of your engine. When you can have intake and exhaust change their rates with variable valve timing, which is controlled by dual overhead cams and solenoids, you can get a lot more power out of engines. I mean, if you just took an engine and you just changed the cam profile, you could easily get extra horsepower out of it just because of changing those profiles. So this is what Chrysler does with the 3.6 liter and the 5.7 Hemi. But if you know anything about the 5.7 Hemi, it has an inherent flaw in the modern designs where the overhead cams are starved of oil at idle and low RPMs. If you're at anything lower than 1,000, and even 1,000, I'd say you'd have to be 1,500 and up to run at normal performance, you will starve those overhead cams of oil because they are so high up in the engine. Because they're starved of oil, that's not good for long term, and eventually your lifters are going to fail. So Chrysler has taken it upon themselves with these insane dual overhead cam designs, because they know that the engine will be starved of oil at RPMs lower than like 1,500. They will not let the car run at RPMs lower than 1,500. You can manually make it. I can manually shift it into like, seventh gear at 35 miles an hour and drop it down to like 1,100, 1,200 RPM. But if you didn't do that, the car won't do that in automatic mode, because the car doesn't want you to do that, because Chrysler knows that if you don't do that, the engine is not going to last as long. I just find that hilarious that they have to build this design in. You would think you get better gas mileage when you go in a higher gear ratio like that. You feel better driveline wise when you're in a higher gear ratio if you went into seventh gear. But Chrysler will not let you, because they know it will make the engine die faster. I love making fun of the engineering that these companies make. I mean, it's just hilarious to see that a company that's been around God knows how many years can't even fucking design a vehicle. I mean, like, it's just like, this is in addition to so many other fucking mistakes Chrysler makes. I mean, if you guys paid attention to my story a few months ago in the winter, I found out that Chrysler does not put a powerful enough transmission paired with the engine. Like, the engine, the power that the 5.7 Hemi puts out is too much power for the ZF model that they put in the car. The ZF model of transmission that they put in is only rated at like, I don't know, I think I did the math out. It was like 350 pound-feet of torque. And the fucking, the Hemi puts out like 380 or like 400 pound-feet of torque. And it's like, are you fucking kidding me? It's like you can't even put together the right components together to make your car last. And people wonder why I don't like American car companies today. This is why, because they cheap the fuck out. And I'm not saying that other car companies don't, because they all do. Honda does, Toyota does. They all cheap out in some way today. But it's just fucking hilarious how much the American car companies do. Like, you will see companies like Honda and Toyota cheap out. You'll see them put more plastic materials in the engine bay and plastics around the car and lower quality materials to save money and get better gas mileage and meet EPA standards and not care about, certain things. But you will never see a car like a Honda or a Toyota fail as fast as you will see an American car fail. It does not matter if you have the best made transmission in the world from ZF. Your 5.7 Hemi is not going to last as long as a fucking Honda 4-cylinder. Your 5.7 Hemi isn't going to last as long as, like, you know, a fucking Honda V6. Like, it's just, I can't. And even if Toyota's putting in a V6 twin turbo in the new Tundra, I hate turbos and I don't like that idea, but you know goddamn well that Toyota's gonna make it work. But if Ram were ever to do that, if they were ever to do a dual turbocharge, it would fucking destroy the transmission and the engine would not last.